Imagine this, a standard military directive, sent through encrypted channels from Western military advisors, and they're expecting African commanders to comply immediately. Standard procedure.
Right. Business as usual for decades.
But this time, across the continent, something completely different happened. Something unprecedented.
Yeah.
A categorical no.
A flat refusal.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And look, this isn't just some minor political shift. It feels more like a revolutionary transformation in military loyalty. A really profound reorientation.
It really is.
For decades, African armies were, well, let's face it, often conditioned to serve foreign interests. But 2025 seems to be this watershed moment.
A real turning point.
What we're seeing now is African armies saying explicitly, we are not instruments of your foreign policy. Instead, they're pledging allegiance to their own people, their own land, their own idea of sovereignty.
And what's truly fascinating here, I think, is the sheer scale of it. This isn't just, a few isolated incidents here and there.
No, it feels bigger.
It is. It's the emergence of entirely new command philosophies. It's reshaping the whole geopolitical landscape. So today, we really want to dig into how we got to this pivotal moment and, maybe more importantly, what does it actually mean for the continent and really for the world?
Okay, so we're going to try and give you a shortcut sort of to understanding this huge geopolitical and psychological shift.
That's the plan.
So to really get a handle on this powerful no, I think we first need to understand the history behind the yes. For generations, how were these armies actually designed to serve interests outside their own nations? What did that look like?
Yeah, that's crucial. And look, this isn't ancient history we're talking about. This system, well, it worked incredibly effectively for a long time, right up until very recently.
How so?
Well, think back to the colonial era. When European powers established military forces in Africa, they weren't building armies to defend African interests. Not at all.
They were tools of control.
Exactly. Instruments of control, resource extraction, submission. The whole model was crystal clear. Obedience to foreign command, loyalty to external goals, and suppressing any real African self-determination. That was paramount.
So, okay, independence comes along.
Yeah.
Did that fundamental dynamic just vanish? Or did it just sort of change shape?
It mostly changed shape. That's a good way to put it. In many, many cases, direct colonial military control just morphed into what you might call neo-colonial military arrangements. Meaning African armies often kept that orientation towards foreign military powers. They stayed dependent on outside training, outside equipment, and they were sort of integrated into Western strategic plans, which, let's be honest, often put foreign interests first.
Right.
Take France, for instance. They had these so-called defense agreements. French military advisors were embedded right into African command structures.
So not just advising from afar.
No, deeply embedded. And these agreements, they often gave France rights to bases, overflight, even intervention. French strategic goals frequently just became the default for African military planning. The expectation was that African armies would help French intervention, not push back against it.
Was France unique in this, or did other major powers have similar setups, maybe with slight variations?
No, it wasn't just France. Not by a long shot. The United States, particularly through AFRICOM, which was set up in 2007, also created a kind of continental military framework.
AFRICOM, right.
Yeah, and this essentially positioned African armies as, well, junior partners in American strategic objectives. The training programs, the equipment they provided, joint operations, it was all designed to align African militaries with U.S. foreign policy goals.
And this system, it just hummed along for decades.
Pretty much seamlessly. You'd have African military leaders going to Western military academies. They'd internalize foreign strategic thinking, come home, and implement policies that often served external interests more than national ones.
Wow, that's quite a system. The psychological aspect, too.
Oh, absolutely. The psychological conditioning was so deep that many genuinely believed that serving Western strategic objectives was the same as serving their own countries. Getting approval from the West, that became the ultimate validation, the gold standard of their professional competence.
That is a powerful and kind of insidious legacy to overcome. But clearly, something fundamental has shifted, irrevocably, it seems, in the last 5 years or so. It's changing everything. So where did this transformation, this breaking of old loyalties, actually start?
Well, the spark really came from a place many wouldn't have expected. the Sahel region.
Okay.
African armies there, they'd been fighting these seemingly endless wars against extremist groups. And despite a huge Western military presence on the ground,
Lots of boots on the ground, yeah.
exactly, but they often felt they received minimal real support. And young officers, the ones actually on the front lines, they saw firsthand how these Western-designed counterterrorism strategies were failing again and again.
So it wasn't just about, like, tactical disagreements. It was a deeper frustration.
Yeah.
A sense of being used, maybe?
Right. Absolutely. A profound disillusionment. Look at Mali back in 2020. Colonel Assimi Govida, he led officers who were just fed up. They felt their country was being treated like a, quote, playground for foreign military experiments, while their own people were suffering from insecurity, underdevelopment.
So that wasn't just a typical coup then?
No, it signaled something more. It felt like the beginning of a new philosophy, one that explicitly put Malian interests first, above those external strategic frameworks.
And then the pattern continued.
It did. Burkina Faso, 2022, Captain Ibrahim Traoré and his officers, they didn't just tweak the system, they fundamentally rejected the entire framework of military cooperation that had kept their army subordinate to foreign goals.
He had that very striking quote about it, didn't he? It really laid down a marker.
He absolutely did. He said very directly, these are our soldiers, this is our country, and we will determine our own strategic priorities. I mean, that sent shockwaves, really.
You can imagine.
And then Niger followed suit in 2023. General Abdourahmane Chiani led officers who basically said, enough. They refused to keep acting as proxies in Western geopolitical games while their own people were struggling with poverty, even though Niger sits on some of the world's biggest uranium deposits.
So it's crucial to understand this wasn't just about grabbing power. It was a genuine internal shift, a psychological transformation within these armies, redefining their whole purpose.
Precisely. For decades, African military officers were taught, conditioned even, to see Western approval as the ultimate benchmark. Professional competence, strategic thinking, it was all measured against that external standard.
Questioning it was almost seen as unprofessional.
Exactly. Questioning Western military guidance was often framed as unprofessionalism or naivety. This new era completely throws that out. It redefines military loyalty, saying, no, external validation isn't the measure.
What is then?
Our people's trust, our nation's interest, that's our true measure.
Okay, so if you're breaking these old ties, these old loyalties, the logical next step is you have to build something new. And what's happening now, in terms of regional cooperation in the Sahel, that looks truly groundbreaking.
It really is. If we zoom out a bit and connect the dots, the formation of the Alliance of Sahel States, the AES, well, it's something we haven't really seen before in African military history.
How so?
You've got three countries, Mali, Burkina Faso, Niger, all pulling their armies out of these Western-dominated security structures at the same time. They formally left ECOWAS on January 29, 2025. But the military side of this shows some really sophisticated strategic thinking.
So it's more than just a political statement. They're actively decoupling their military forces from that whole Western ecosystem of influence. What does this new consortium they've built actually do?
Right, they're not just leaving a vacuum. The alliance set up the Sahel Security Consortium. Think of it as a new, independent framework for military cooperation. It's designed to coordinate defense strategies, share intelligence, develop integrated security approaches for their shared challenges.
Okay, but how is that different from previous African efforts?
Here's the absolute key difference. Unlike pretty much all previous African military arrangements, this consortium operates without any Western military oversight or approval. Zero.
Truly independent.
For the first time in decades, you have African armies developing military strategies based on African assessments of African threats, using African intelligence networks, and implementing African solutions. The psychological impact of this, the liberation it represents, you really can't overstate it.
I can imagine.
Think about it. Young African military officers who maybe grew up believing that getting ahead meant getting Western approval are now seeing their own commanders achieve international recognition, massive popular support at home, precisely by rejecting those old frameworks. That's a powerful lesson.
It creates a completely different model for success.
A huge demonstration effect, absolutely.
And this focus on national interest, it goes beyond just military strategy and alliances, doesn't it? It seems to touch on something deeply resonant for many nations, their natural resources, their wealth. How are these armies changing their relationship with that?
That's a really important dimension. It brings up the whole question of economic sovereignty. For so long, African military forces often ended up acting, sometimes implicitly, as security guards for multinational corporations extracting Africa's wealth.
Protecting the mines, the pipelines?
Exactly. Often with very little benefit flowing back to the actual people of the country. Under this new military leadership, we're seeing armies repositioning themselves. They're acting as guardians of national resource wealth, not just facilitators for its removal.
Can you give us a specific example? How does that look on the ground?
Sure. Let's take Burkina Faso. It's Africa's fourth largest gold producer, huge amounts of gold. Under Captain Traore's leadership, the military is now actively involved in making sure that this mineral wealth actually contributes to national development.
Instead of just profits going overseas.
Precisely. The goal is tangible benefit for Burkinabe people. And there are projections, suggesting Burkina Faso's economy could see significant growth, maybe around 8% average from 2025 to 2043. That could dramatically reduce poverty, potentially lifting over 2 million people out of it.
That's a massive potential impact.
It is. Or look at Niger. They produce something like 40% of the European Union's uranium. Huge strategic importance. The military leadership there is actively renegotiating contracts. The aim: ensure that the wealth from that uranium benefits the people of Niger, rather than primarily enriching, say, French nuclear corporations.
So it's a fundamental change in perspective.
Completely. Western corporations that, for decades, operated pretty comfortably under the protection of these same militaries are now finding that these armies see them as potential economic threats if the deals aren't fair to national sovereignty. It's a major shift.
This really does sound like a complete overhaul, a top-to-bottom reimagining of what the military institution is for. It's not just about refusing orders or guarding resources. It must go deeper, like how officers are trained, where the equipment comes from, a whole infrastructure.
Oh, absolutely. You've hit on it. This transformation is multifaceted. It has to be to achieve genuine strategic autonomy. First off, education. They are making a conscious effort to break the dependency on Western military academies.
Building their own capacity.
Exactly. African training institutions are developing their own African strategic doctrine. The Niger Military Academy, for instance, has expanded its curriculum. It's now offering advanced strategic studies focused specifically on African security challenges, resource protection, regional stability viewed through an African lens.
And leaders like Traoré seem to embody this independent thinking.
He does. Captain Traoré is a really interesting example of someone who developed sophisticated strategic thinking largely outside those traditional Western military education pathways.
And intelligence, you mentioned intelligence sharing earlier, that's got to be central to any real independence.
It's absolutely critical. For decades, African armies were heavily reliant on Western intelligence, Western threat assessments. That inherently shapes your perspective and your actions.
You see the threats they want you to see.
To some extent, yes. Now, the Alliance of Sahel States has set up the Sahel Intelligence Consortium. This is their own independent framework for gathering, analyzing, sharing intelligence among themselves.
So they make their own assessments.
Exactly. It allows for autonomous strategic assessments based on their intelligence collection, their analysis. It informs their counterterrorism decisions, their border security planning, without needing to filter it through or rely on Western frameworks. Their decisions become truly theirs.
Okay, what about the hardware? Equipment is often the most visible sign of dependency, isn't it? The tanks, the planes.
It definitely is, and it's a major area of focus. They're making a deliberate strategic shift away from relying solely on Western military equipment. The goal is diversified defense partnerships.
Not putting all their eggs in one basket.
Precisely. This includes pushing for technology transfer, exploring domestic manufacturing possibilities, even if small scale initially, and expanding regional cooperation on procurement and maintenance. We've seen examples like Russia doubling its government scholarship quotas for Burkinabe citizens for 2024-2025, with many of those specifically aimed at military tech and defense engineering.
So it diversifies their sources and potentially reduces vulnerability to sanctions or political pressure from one bloc.
That's a key strategic driver, yes. It significantly reduces their vulnerability to external manipulation through equipment supply.
Now, in today's world, the information space is just as important as the physical battlefield. How are these new military leaders handling the global narrative? Because words, perception, they could be weaponized.
That is a critical front, and they seem acutely aware of it. Leaders like Ibrahim Traoré, They understand perfectly well how Western media often uses loaded terms, military coup, junta rule, to frame their
To
actions.
delegitimize them.
Exactly, to delegitimize African military agency, to undermine their claims to sovereignty. So what are they doing? They're developing their own quite sophisticated communication strategies. They're using social media platforms, African broadcasting networks to speak directly to African populations and the wider world, bypassing those Western editorial filters.
Taking control of their own story.
It's a crucial part of the wider struggle for genuine independence. This battle for narrative control is something they're actively fighting.
Wow. Okay, this deep dive has really illuminated a powerful, almost tectonic shift. Stepping back, what are the wider ripples? The broader geopolitical implications, the long-term consequences of this transformation, both for Africa and maybe for the rest of the world?
Well, it forces a fundamental rethink, a recalculation of the global military balance, or at least regional balances. Western military establishments, which for decades kind of took African military cooperation for granted.
As a given for projecting power, securing resources.
Exactly, they assumed it was available. Now they're discovering that African armies might have their own independent objectives, prioritizing African interests first. And this isn't happening in a vacuum. It's happening alongside a broader global shift towards multipolarity.
Meaning power is more distributed, not just held by a few superpowers.
Right. There's more room for maneuver, more opportunities for nations, especially in the global south, to chart their own course.
And on a practical level, the big question is, are these newly independent armies actually being effective? Are they improving security on the ground?
That's the crucial test, isn't it? And the evidence so far, particularly in the Sahel context, suggests yes. Despite losing direct Western military support training, intelligence, air power in some cases, these armies have, in several key areas, demonstrated improved security outcomes. By using strategies grounded in an African understanding of African security dynamics, leveraging local knowledge, focusing on community engagement alongside military action, coordinating better amongst themselves through things like the AES. These successes directly challenge those old assumptions about African military capability and strategic thinking needing Western guidance to be effective.
That must also be having a huge impact on the next generation of officers coming up through the ranks.
Oh, absolutely. Think about the generational impact. Young African military officers today are serving under commanders like Traore. They're learning leadership philosophies, strategic doctrines that put African sovereignty front and center, not external compliance.
So their whole professional identity is being forged differently.
Exactly. It's being defined by African interests, not by seeking Western approval. The long-term effects of the shift in military education and culture, well, they're going to reshape African military institutions for decades to come.
And finally, is this Big Refusal, as we've been calling it, likely to stay contained within the Sahel? Or could we see this becoming a broader trend, a continental awakening?
Well, success breeds imitation, doesn't it? The achievements in the Sahel, however complex and ongoing they are, they create a powerful demonstration effect across the continent.
Other officers are watching.
Definitely. Military officers in East Africa, Central Africa, Southern Africa, they're observing their colleagues in the Sahel who chose sovereignty over compliance and who gained popular support, international recognition, and arguably strategic success by doing so. That's incredibly inspiring. It encourages them to explore similar paths, to look for ways to reduce dependency on those traditional Western military frameworks and build their own autonomous defense cooperation.
So it could represent the start of a truly new philosophy of military professionalism across Africa, one defined by African sovereignty first and foremost.
That's certainly the potential trajectory we're seeing emerge.
What an incredible journey we've taken through this unprecedented shift. We've really seen how African armies are pushing back against historical patterns, refusing external orders, and embracing a loyalty rooted in their own people and nations. It's clearly not just about a few brave individuals making isolated decisions.
No, it's much deeper. It's about entirely new concepts of military purpose, professional identity, strategic thinking, taking hold. It feels genuinely historic.
The stakes, as you said, couldn't be higher. If this succeeds in the long run, It demonstrates that African armies can operate independently, they can protect African interests effectively, and they can actually contribute to national development without that external oversight.
And the signs are there. There are compelling reasons for optimism, from the sophisticated strategic thinking we see in leaders like Ibrahim Traoré to the practical cooperation happening through the Alliance of Sahel states, and crucially, the groundswell of popular support for leaders who champion national sovereignty.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, maybe here's a final thought for you, the listener, to consider. In this changing world, with power dynamics shifting all around us, what does this big refusal from African armies truly signify for the future? For global security, yes, but perhaps even more profoundly, for African self-determination. What new models of partnership might emerge, and how could this fundamentally redefine what military loyalty even means in the 21st century?
It's a transformation that has definitely begun, and watching it unfold is witnessing history in the making.